This is day 1 of Zwift Games, and I didn't update my racing score for over 2 months. Ladies and gentlemen, Zwift Games are finally here. This is the event I've been looking forward to ever since last year's edition ended, and it is a race that I personally consider the peak of Zwift racing season. Which means that I will try to take this series as seriously as possible. There are going to be 5 stages, each of them on brand new route, and the way it's going to work is the first stage is going to be by far the easiest, at least on the paper, and each subsequent stage is going to get harder and harder. So this is stage 1, Makuri Madness, and you can see on the elevation profile that this is either flat or downhill. There is only one small bump near the end of this race, which can be honestly a little treacherous, because just because the route is easy doesn't mean that the race is going to be. What's more, for me this is the first racing score event since the start of January, because I was focusing mainly on Tour de Zwift. My racing score before the start of this race was 501, but honestly I had no idea whether my fitness improved or decreased in the meantime. And what you could see right from the start is basically all the riders are taking this event very seriously. The pace started very hot, and even though that it is basically completely flat, there were some attempts to break the group. However, so far it has been only 1 or 2 riders each time, which wasn't very dangerous because the power of the pack is always stronger than these small breakaways. But it was very clear that we will need to be careful of those attacks, because if there was a larger group that would split, maybe 3, 4, 5 riders, they could pretty much break away from the group and sustain the pace until the finish. Which is something I'm okay with in Tour de Zwift, because there's always a chance that there is way better rider than I am, but it is not something I'm okay in my own racing score group. And especially in an important event like this, I want to race for the podium every time I enter this race, so I tried to keep myself in the draft, but I was prepared to chase a breakaway if there was one that I would consider dangerous. And if you take a look at the minimap, you'll realize that I will very soon have chance to do exactly that. There were about 3 riders or maybe 4 riders that were about 4 seconds in front of us. I tried to wait for a little bit to see if the group would start the chase, but I really didn't want to risk anything, so I put down the power and start chasing them myself, hoping that the peloton would either follow me or that I would break away with the front guys. It was somewhat risky move, because obviously I would drain my power reserves a little bit to do this, potentially for no big benefit, but I didn't want to let them go. And it looks like the group behind me actually followed my move, so very shortly you will see the peloton getting back together. But if I am to speak honestly, when I looked at the course profile for the first time, I didn't expect it to be this hard this early in the first race. My heart rate is 175 and we are still riding on the flat section only. So if the following races are going to ramp up in the difficulty, it's really going to be one hell of an event. So our time in Nyokyo is slowly coming to an end, and I was really hoping that the downhill section through the pain caverns would allow me to recover a little bit, because if you look at the chart, it's still consistently yellow and red for me, so this is not an easy race. The group is consistently outputting around 3.5 watts per kilo, sometimes even 4 watts per kilo, and I am still mainly riding in the draft. But as you will be able to see very shortly, there were riders that had different plans. Here we are entering the downhill section in the pain caverns, and there were actually guys that ramped up the pace and attempted breakaway on the downhill, and that really didn't make me happy at this point in the race. But as you can see, the momentum of the group is very strong, and after a little bit of chasing, we managed to regroup once again, and the rest of the descent was actually quite civilized. So even though it didn't look like so at the start of the descent, I actually managed to recover quite well. I dropped my heart rate to sub 160, which I consider quite a luxury in a serious event like this. And at this point, the fate of the race would be decided by 2 things. The first one would be whether or not I would be able to sustain the group's pace on the corkscrew climb, which is not long, it's very short, but it is that kind of punchy climb that the guys can really push down the power to about 8 watts per kilo. And let's be honest, that kind of effort could break you really quickly. And the second question was, would I be actually able to outsprint the group if I actually survive the climb? Would the climb drain my power to even attempt such sprint? Those were the kind of questions that were running through my head at this point as we were approaching the bump in the road that was the corkscrew climb. I was actually quite nervous at this point, I need to be honest with you. But I was also firmly decided that I would give this my all, no matter how bad it would hurt. And that was actually what I kept repeating myself on this climb as I was outputting around 6 watts per kilo, going through my power phrases that I tried to repeat myself when things get really tough. And this point was the one that would decide the race, because not only that the finish of this climb is the steepest, but also the way that you carry momentum through the summit is going to decide whether or not you will be able to continue for the sprint. And I have to say, I was actually quite pleased how I did that. I managed to stay at the front. I was hurting pretty bad, no doubt about that. I had my heart rate over 180 BPM, which is a lot for me. But by this point, I knew I was going to get to the finishing sprint and that I was going to be able to say that I gave this my all. Final 700 meters, I tried to mainly recover from the uphill segment and try to position myself not only for the finishing sprint but also to be able to react if someone went early. But I guess at this point pretty much everyone was steamed from the climb and it was going to get to the finishing sprint. I expected first riders to go around 300 meters. You can already see some orange numbers on the right. At this point there were about 8 riders in front of me, so I had some sort of a lead out train. I pushed down the power, crossed 1000 watts for a little bit, so I had some residual power, but I quickly needed to get back into saddle, but it was enough and I managed to sprint for the 3rd place and my first podium after a very long time in scored race. My racing score has improved by 8 points to 509 after this race, and I got my exert breakthrough. I improved my threshold power. As for the general classification, I managed to do this course in 22 minutes and 2 seconds, which was about 3 minutes slower than the best riders in the classification. I'm actually super pleased with this result. Let me know in the comments below how you did during this first race, and if you didn't, just post your favorite emoji because it helps the video to spread. Ciao!